Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. What's up, Gym Bros? Big Paul here with another Anabolic Q&A. This is where I answer all of your questions about training, nutrition, and performance enhancement while getting you better results and keeping you safe from the stupid crap I know you bros love to do. I have some great questions lined up today from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding members community. If you want to sign up, go over to the link in the description below. It's $30 a month. Is Tirzepatide a better option than Retatrutide if you're worried about the elevated pulse that Retatrutide causes? After years on TRT, what's the best way to start a test in NPP nandrolone cycle? What home-based health testing options are available for PED users? Did you always want to compete, and was there a turning point when you realized that you could competitively? And I have a ton of other great questions lined up as well. We'll dig into all those in just 1 second. Before we get started, I would appreciate it if you could take a quick moment and like and subscribe this channel. I get a lot of people that watch my videos, not that many people subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and would help support my channel and keep things going if you could. All right, first question I got lined up here from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding members community is from Dave L. Dave asks, I'm on Retatrutide at about 7 milligrams per week, and my resting heart rate has gone up to around 100. Jesus, that's too high. 5 points higher than usual. If you're 5 points higher, if your normal resting pulse is 95, we got other problems going on. Considering my age and this increase in heart rate, would Tirzepatide be a better option? And if so, what would be a comparable dose? Well, all GLP1s seem to increase pulse to a certain degree through sympathetic nervous system drive. It's by increasing norepinephrine, from what I understand, and lowering parasympathetic response. So that's just going to happen no matter which one you are on. Now, we need to evaluate the cost versus benefits when it comes to this stuff. Is it the increased insulin sensitivity, the decreased body weight, they all seem to improve blood pressure to a certain degree. Are all these benefits going to outweigh the increase in pulse? Now, with that said, like I said, Retatrutide seems to be worse at it because of the issues with the glucagon agonist on top of the GLP-1. The heart does have GLP-1 receptors. It seems to be genetically unique. Some people have more, some people have less. Look, I'm not a doctor, but it's just from what I understand, from what I've read about GLP-1s, but there is going to be some stimulation that happens, and you're going to have some corresponding increase in pulse. There's also secondary effects through lowering of blood pressure, vasodilation, and some other things that happen as a result of getting healthier that could increase pulse as well and cause a bit of tachycardia. Now with Reta, we have the addition of the glucagon agonism, which is also going to increase pulse even further. And we've seen that, just an anecdote from when I've run both Tirzepatide and Retatrutide, I definitely noticed a significant difference between pulse with Retatrutide versus with the Tirzepatide. I didn't really notice much of a change on Tirzepatide. I got something between a 8 to 10 point increase in my average pulse rate when I first started running Retatrutide. Now, over a period of time, that did seem to settle down. It kind of sort of came back to baseline. And if you look at the studies, that's what the studies seem to indicate, that, initially that there is some increase in pulse, and it seems to sort of come back down to baseline after 6 to 7 months. Something like that. I don't recall exactly, but that's what I remember from when I looked at the study when I made my Retatrutide video. Now, the glucagon agonist increases CAMP signaling, which is going to increase heart contractions, and that is going to cause an increase in pulse. So you have that on top of the already increased stimulation of sympathetic nervous system drive that the GLP-1 is going to cause. This probably is also a factor in increased fat burning as well. These are other effects that will have. There is somewhat of a central nervous system stimulation that happens with these drugs. So you are going to have an increase in pulse initially when you start running them. Now, how much, it seems to vary from person to person. Some people have a more pronounced effect than others. Like I said, I didn't really notice much of a difference on Tirzepatide. Tirzepatide came with its own set of problems when I ran it. I did notice on Tirzepatide that my appetite was absolutely smashed on a very low introduction dose of 2.5 milligrams. I literally could not eat. I did not notice that with 1 milligram of Reta. And I know you asked about comparable doses. I mean, just what I have seen is 1 to 2 milligrams of Reta seems to equal out to about 2.5 milligrams of Tirzepatide as far as effect goes. That's just my anecdote. It seems like with Tirzepatide in prescription settings, they start you off at 2.5, then they move you up to 5, then to 7.5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not really sure off the top of my head what the max dose is. But if you're running a 7 milligram dose of Retatrutide, that's a pretty spicy dose. I probably would back off that dose, man. What I've seen with people is that, 3 to 4 milligrams is a pretty profound effect on weight loss, even less. I mean, like I've seen people lose a pretty significant amount of weight on 1 to 2 milligrams. Now, if you're just using it for appetite suppression, there are other tools out there you can use for appetite suppression on top of it. Now, as far as heart rate data, this is what I found from the clinical trials, is the summary that I found. So Retatrutide in the clinical trials seemed to have had 5 to 10 beats per minute increase in resting pulse rate. Phase 2 reports from the phase 2 clinical trials noted that seemed to peak mid-trial. It was somewhere around 12 to 24 weeks that the pulse peaked, and then it went down. And that's what I've seen with the anecdote, is that eventually you get through that initial phase, and then it starts to settle down. A lot of the side effects, your body gets acclimated to it, whatever the hell it's happening. Tirzepatide, looking at the numbers that I have here, had an average increase in pulse of 2 to 5 beats per minute. And it seemed that BP sub-studies reported that dose-dependent 24 HR plus 2.5 beats per minute peaked at 35 weeks and then started to decline after that. Overall averages on the study was a plus 0.6 to 2.6 beats per minute once people regulated to the dosing. Now, long-term, we don't know what the effects are. We don't have any long-term studies on really any of this stuff, but short-term, there seems to be no significant increase in cardiovascular events on either drug in the research cohort. There wasn't any difference. Now, with that said, we don't know long-term. It's just speculation. What I would say is if you have any sort of pre-existing cardiovascular conditions, you might want to proceed with caution. And you said that your resting pulse rate is at 100 right now, and it increased by 5 when running Retatrutide. I mean, if you're running around with a 95 resting pulse rate, you got a fucking problem, man. You probably should see a cardiologist, get that checked out, see what the hell's going on. I am running a beta blocker that seems to abate some of the side effects when it comes to increased pulse. I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm not a medical doctor. I'd consult with your doctor about that, but it has worked pretty well for me. I'm on 5 milligrams of Nebivolol, and it seems to have counteracted any increase in pulse that it would cause. My resting pulse is in the high 60s when I'm sitting around. That's more of a normal resting pulse. Really, cardiologists consider anything up to 100 normal. Once you get above normal, that's tachycardia, but I would say if you're above 80 with a resting pulse, you got some shit you need to address. There's something going on. It's a sign of poor cardiovascular health or maybe just overstimulation of the central nervous system. But I would seriously evaluate things and see where you're at and be careful, proceed with caution. 7 milligrams seems like a spicy dose. I'd speak to your doctor and probably consult with a cardiologist to find out what's going on and make sure that your heart is actually healthy. All right, next question from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding Members Community is from Dave C. Dave asks, how do you decide between a growth phase or a prep phase when setting low day macros, especially with carbohydrates? Yeah, I mean, it really just depends from person to person. If I got somebody with a super fast metabolism, I will leave carbohydrates in on the low day. I usually, what I find that with carbohydrates, sort of a baseline of 150 grams. And if we look at scientific data, that's sort of the bare minimum for basic neurologic and central nervous system function for your brain to work properly. Now, the assumption with the low days and carb cycling is that you're not lifting weights during that day. You're just doing your normal daily activity. So you shouldn't have a high demand for additional glucose that day. And that should be enough to make it so your brain still functions. Now, I do have guys that I put on 0 carbs on those days. What I found is if you dip below 150 grams of carbs, you're just better off going to 0 carbs, because you get into this weird nether region. Like if you're, say, eating 75 or 100 grams of carbs, it's just enough to make you feel like shit, not get into ketosis to any degree. Not that you're, I know they say it takes days to get in ketosis, but I found that people are active. If you get up and do some cardio and you eat some, eat some extra fats, gets a little bit of MCT oil in the morning, that you can actually shift into ketosis pretty quickly during that day. But I just find that, 150 grams or 0, those are the two that seem to work the best. Now, with guys that seem to hold a lot of water weight, guys that are struggling with insulin sensitivity, guys that are having a hard time losing weight, especially in a cutting phase, I would use that day to run a deep calorie deficit. Even in the off season, I like to have the low days be in a caloric deficit so we can give our GI a break from all the food. I'll even do intermittent fasting myself. I'll take 1 day a week where I just don't eat for 24 hours, and then I will have break my fast in the evening, usually around 8 p.m., and I'll have a steak and a potato. I like to go to Texas Roadhouse, and that's just sort of how I break my fast. But really, that's sort of the logic here. A lot of it depends on what phase we're in. If we're in the off-season phase, we could be a little more liberal with food. If we're on contest prep, if we're in a fat loss phase, we can use that day to leverage a higher caloric deficit, do some cardio. If we're not weight training, we don't need a lot of glucose present to drive performance in our workouts. So we can leverage that day to burn some fat and use it to give our body a reason to get leaner. And in the off season, like I said, it's just a break from food, resets insulin sensitivity, and helps us with digestion. That's kind of my logic with the low days. All right, Stephen K. This is my first blast in about 7 years. I have been on TRT at 150 milligrams a week and plan on running test and NPP for this off-season cycle, since Mast and Primo are hard to find right now. What dosages should I start with both compounds at, given that I can't run higher, that I haven't run higher doses in years? I want to keep things modest. Well, man, I don't like running test and NPP side by side. If I'm going to run NPP, I like to use it as a third compound. It's a tertiary. I like my secondary compound to be something that's going to manage estrogen, so we can push the testosterone a bit higher. The issue with nandrolone, running it alone with testosterone, it seems like nandrolone just makes the side effects that you experience from testosterone worse. You get issues with gyno, you get issues with increased estrogen conversion, you get issues with increased water retention. If you are not going to run a secondary compound that's going to address estrogen conversion, you may need to run an AI with it. You could always run Anavar. I'm not a big fan of orals in the off season because they tend to smash lipids. Maybe even EQ is an option. I have seen Primobolan available in some places, so that's another consideration. If I were going to run Nandrolone, I used to run quite a few tests in Nandrolone cycles when I was younger. I would keep the doses very modest, at least at a maximum half of whatever my testosterone dose is, probably more like a third. So I would probably start off with something like 300 test and 100 milligrams of Nandrolone. Just personally, that's where I would start, and definitely have an AI on hand. It's not my preferential way to run things. I would also consider throwing some growth hormone in. When I am doing cycles, I like to start with the bioidentical hormones first for a harm reduction perspective. We know what the downstream effects of both growth hormone and testosterone are, so I start with those as my baseline, and then we layer in other things. What I have found with Nandrolone in 19 Nors particular, that any synthetic progestins are sort of spin the wheel with side effects when it comes to adding them into the cycle. You can have psychological side effects. You can have physiological side effects such as gynecomastia, increased estrogen conversion with Nandrolone itself. Tren is another whole bag of worms. Can of worms, sorry, not bag. Worms wouldn't stay very well in a bag, but Tren has its own problems. I just don't like using 19 Nors as a primary adjunct to my testosterone therapy. I would probably pick something else, but if you have no other choice, I would keep the doses very low, have an AI on hand, throw some GH in the mix, be responsible with it, get your estrogen tested mid-cycle, see where it's at, and be on the lookout for side effects. Next question here is from George P. George asks, what are some home testing options compared to lab work? I have a glucose monitor and keto sticks, but what other tests are available for consumers of PEDs? For example, is there a way to test estrogen or any other hormone markers frequently without sending things out to a lab? Well, we're pretty limited in our options. I do have things that when I'm coaching people or doing consults with people that I generally recommend. I would say sticking with, checking your glucose regularly. Now, continuous glucose monitors, CGMs, you'll hear them called, have gotten a lot cheaper and are more accessible now. The Lingo is one that I have quite a few of my clients using. It's $250 for a 3-month supply, or you can get a 2-week monitor for $50. So, you're talking about $70-80 a month. You can monitor your glucose and see where it's at, how your body responds to the food you're eating. If you are taking any growth hormone, you can see if you have any sort of insulin resistance and increase in glucose levels corresponding with your GH dose, so you can monitor that. There are home hemoglobin meters. You can get them on Amazon. If you want to keep an eye on your hemoglobin, you can do a formula to figure out what your hematocrit is from there. And it's pretty close correlation with red blood cell count as well. If that's something that you're concerned about, there are meters to check that at home. Keto Mojo has a blood glucose meter that can also check ketones from blood sample. But if you're not on a keto diet, there's really no reason to check ketones, or you're diabetic. I really wouldn't worry about ketones. Blood pressure cuff, that's another good thing you can check at home. A oxygen meter to make sure that your blood oxygen is high enough. A lot of times if you have sleep apnea, you'll notice when you get up in the morning that your blood oxygen levels will be low. There's also, you can get Apple Watches. There's the Whoop, or whatever the fuck that thing's called, if you want to collect data on heart rate, heart rhythm, heart rate variability, sleep, etc. Those are other good things that you can collect data on. I use the Apple Watch personally, and we can get some indication. As far as I know, there's no real reliable home test for estrogen. I've seen that there's saliva tests for hormones, but I just don't know how much I would trust any of that shit. I would just go get blood work done. Blood work is so easy now in the United States, unless you live in New Jersey or New York, where I think you have to have a doctor's order to get it, which is just utterly ridiculous to me. It's your body. You should be able to go get blood work done whenever you want. I don't understand why you have to go through a doctor to get your own fucking blood work done in those states. It's super restrictive and silly, if you ask me. But regardless, there's places like Walk-In Lab where you can go in, or even Merrick Diagnostics. There's a million of these places. You can order lab work online, go to a Quest or a LabCorp. Most people have them close by. I have a Quest a mile from my house. I could probably walk there. And you can go get blood work done and have your results back in 2 days. A full blood panel, without hormones. I don't know that you need to be testing hormones all the time, but without hormones, it's about $150 if you just want your general health markers. So those are some tools that you can have at home. And then I would get blood work done periodically. When I like to do blood work is usually mid-cycle, so I can see what things look like full blast, and at the end of the cruise, so I have a baseline of what my health markers look like, and we can compare the two to each other and look at any trends or changes in things. All right, next question I got here is from Aaron W. I've heard from retired bodybuilders that eating over 250 grams of carbs daily stresses the pancreas and causes long-term damage. How true is this? And what carb limit would you recommend on a mass-gaining diet for someone not using insulin and weighing 200 pounds? Well, that sounds like a bunch of hooey to me. I don't know where the fuck people get this shit from, to be honest with you. Here's the thing. Diabetes long-term is a result of insulin resistance. And yes, eating carbs will increase natural insulin production, and long-term, the more exposure to insulin that you have, the more chance that there is for insulin resistance. But there are also other complicated factors that are in here. There's when we're thinking about this equation, activity has a big impact on insulin resistance. The more insulin resistant that you are, the more insulin your body makes, and eventually you get into this phase where your insulin production naturally can't keep up with the amount of insulin resistance that your body has, so it just keeps making more and more and more, and then you have pancreatic burnout, which is what you hear some of the bros talking about. But that's long-term, down the road. You have to have some pretty shitty insulin resistance going on. It's more likely that these bros were just hammering food, eating like shit, and taking a shit ton of GH, which increased insulin resistance. And they never took phases where they addressed the insulin resistance, reset things, got their body in a better place, and then long-term made themselves diabetics. Had nothing to do with the carb intakes. It might have been the 18 units of GH that were taken daily. But people look for simple answers to complex problems, and it's easy to blame the carbohydrates for the problem. I know plenty of dudes that eat a ton of carbohydrates that have never made themselves diabetic. Now, with that said, yes, there is potential risk. The more food that you eat, if you're power shoving food for years and years and years and years on end, and you're taking insulin, you're taking GH, you're doing other things that might cause problems, yes, there is a potential for insulin resistance and diabetes down the line. That is a possibility that could happen. Believe me, there are plenty of old bodybuilders that have made themselves diabetic. It can happen, but I don't think 250 grams of insulin or of carbohydrates is going to do it. That's 1,000 calories. It's like 3 slices of pizza or a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Your average person is eating way shittier than that. I would guarantee you that just your average fat ass that's sitting at home on their couch is eating way more than 250 grams of carbs per day. A bag of potato chips, their latte from Starbucks, their Mountain Dew, their Ben & Jerry's, their pizza, all the other shit that they eat throughout the day. It's probably way more than that. And it's really the combination of high saturated fats and simple sugars that get you in trouble and can compound the effects of insulin resistance. If you look at lab setting, like the quickest way to make a rat insulin resistant, it's not through feeding them high carbohydrate diet. They actually feed them a high saturated fat rat chow that is going to affect their overall insulin sensitivity levels, and then they end up insulin resistant, and they use that as a method. It's the fastest way to make a rat insulin resistant. When they feed them this high fat diet, usually it's something like half of the calories come from fat, saturated fats in particular. I don't know what the rat chow composition is, but it's probably like eating a fucking French fry or ice cream, where half your calories are saturated fat and half of it's sugar. You end up accumulating visceral fat. You end up having liver fat and accumulating fat, intramuscular fat deposits, and all these things contribute to metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance. There is a direct correlation between visceral fat and insulin resistance. So the lower your visceral fat is, the less likely you're going to be insulin resistant. So it's more likely that the high calorie shit bro bulks, the off-season dirty bulks, so to speak, not the carbohydrates, are what making these assholes insulin resistant, on top of the excessive growth hormone use. If you look at the studies on growth hormone use, the number one reported side effect, everybody's worried about organ enlargement, and there's really no evidence that regular therapeutic use of GH causes organ enlargement. You can look, the FDA has data up on, from I think it was from 2000 or from 1995 to 2009 or something. There were no significant reported cases of organ enlargement, organomegalia, I think, or I'm probably slaughtering how to say that. There were no significant reports of it, running 18 units a day for 14 years straight. But diabetes, insulin resistance, was the number one reported side effect from sustained growth hormone use. So it's probably the cheeseburgers and fries, the dirty bulk off seasons, never taking a break from food, and just pushing things for too long. That high saturated fat, high simple carbohydrate diet that a lot of the old school bodybuilders ate, that made them insulin resistant. And then the more insulin resistant you are, the more insulin your body makes, and eventually there's going to be a downstream effect on your function of your pancreas, and eventually you have pancreatic burnout and become insulin dependent diabetic. Then that's probably what's going on, if I were to speculate. If you're eating 250 grams of carbs from rice with no added fats and chicken breast, I would say you probably have a very low chance of becoming insulin resistant. You could probably eat twice that and have very low chances of becoming insulin resistant, especially if you're lifting weights and you're otherwise healthy and being sensible in other areas of your life. So I think that's probably just anecdote. Bros like to oversimplify things and come up with simple answers to complex problems. They don't understand the underlying mechanisms that are going on there, and the reason they end up becoming insulin resistant and diabetic long term is way more complex than that. Now, with that said, if you're slamming 1,000 grams of carbs a day, you might need a little insulin to help out with that. That's just how it goes when you're eating that much, but I don't think you have any risk or worry with eating 250 grams of carbohydrates. All right, next question here from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding Members Community is from Chase C. When managing high estrogen, how do you decide whether to use an AI, reduced test, or a combination of both? Does this strategy differ between blasting and cruising? Yeah, I mean, look, it's all individualistic. Everybody has a different response when it comes to estrogen conversion. Estrogen conversion seems to be very unique from person to person. I've seen dudes that literally have no issues with estrogen. I've seen guys that the slightest amount of tests, they're growing boobies from gyno. I would say more times than not, if you tend to easily gain fat, those are the guys that tend to have more problems with estrogen. In my cycle cheat sheet that you can get on my website for $30, I have breakdowns of how to structure cycles safely. If you want to pick that up, it's over there for, like I said, for $30. Link is in the video description below. But what I've generally seen is that it really depends on the person, and I let the side effects dictate things. If you start having any breast tissue sensitivity, if you start having any moodiness, if you start noticing water retention or increase in blood pressure, then there might be an issue with estrogen. And we can get an estradiol test done for pretty cheap. They're like $40 or $50. But usually I like to try to address estrogen with either Primabol and Equipoise first, and then use an AI if necessary. Right now, with things being somewhat hard to source, using anastrozole may be the only thing. But what I find is sometimes you don't even need to get a blood test if you suspect that your estrogen is high. Anastrozole works quickly. I mean, within a couple days, you'll notice a difference. If you're having any erectile dysfunction, soreness or itchiness in your nipples, you take 1 milligram of anastrozole for 2 days, and then by the third day, your PP is working fine again, and the itchiness in your nipples has gone away. Your nipples aren't sensitive anymore. Then you've got the answer to your problem, that it was likely high estrogen. But you can play around with the ratios. Generally, the ratio that I've seen of test to Primo that seems to, for most people, not for everybody, something like 60 to 70% of your testosterone dose seems to be enough to keep your estrogen right in line. Equipoise seems to be a bit more aggressive at lowering estrogen. I probably would go to like 50% of my testosterone dose if I was using Equipoise as my primary anabolic to moderate estrogen. But once again, this is all anecdote. Everybody's different. It varies from person to person. Adjust accordingly. Listen to your body. Get blood panels done. And see where you're at. And just adjust as needed. Oh, and I almost forgot before I punch out on this one. There is a difference between cruising and blasting. Usually when you go on cruise, you yank out the secondary anabolic and lower testosterone. And what I've seen is there tends to be an estrogen rebound when you pull out the secondary anabolic and lower test doses. A lot of times guys end up, their estrogen goes up. I see it a lot of times post-show. Of course, the guys are doing all kinds of crazy shit, running heavy doses of DHT compounds, and then the DHT-based compounds, and then they end up using AIs or doing other things, and then they yank all that out and just leave the testosterone and growth hormone in, and then they have this huge estrogen rebound post-show, especially if guys come down to TRT or they want to clean out, and then they have this huge estrogen rebound. They get a bunch of water retention. They end up having all this hunger from the estrogen rebound, and then they just end up looking like a wet sack of flour. So, just something to keep in mind. You need to pay closer attention to estrogen rebound when you're coming off your primary anabolic, especially if it's one that has an effect on lowering estrogen. It's just something to keep in mind and to consider when you go into the various phases of your cycles. Corey G, next question here. Is it always advisable to do a health phase between the off-season and contest prep? I've gone straight from the off-season to prep the last 2 years, and my blood work has been good. Is this more a case-by-case decision based on how the off-season looks? Where possible, I do like to give myself a break going into contest prep. Dr. Dean St. Mart had a really good thing up about this. I don't recall where it was. It may have been on Vigorous Steve's podcast. I know we talked about it on mine one time. But Dr. Dean said when you're constantly blasting anabolics, blood panels may look good, but what ends up happening long-term is your body, this was just sort of his theory and speculation, your body is devoting the majority of its stem cell pool away from organ repair and organ health to hypertrophy. It is using that for muscle repair, for muscle growth, all these other things. And then after a while, it has an accumulatory effect on organ health, and then there's a decline in organ health. Now, have I always gone on a cruise before shifting from my off season to contest prep? No. Just being honest with you, I know there are a ton of bodybuilders that never take fucking breaks. Is that smart? Probably not. But I would say if you can program it in, I would take a little bit of a break before going into contest prep. Contest prep is going to be super stressful on your body, both physically and emotionally. I would say take a little bit of break from training and from the PEDs. Let your body achieve some sort of homeostasis. Let it recharge. Let it get ready for the prep so you can have a good push going into your show. If timing doesn't work out that way, you're healthy, blood panels look good. Sometimes you do what you got to fucking do. I get it, but ultimately the best practice would be to take a break so you maintain your health and safety. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we stay healthy long term. All right, next question here is from Philip F. Philip asks, I'm 5'10", 177 pounds. On high carb days, I've been recommended to eat 600 grams of carbs. How do you manage to get that many carbs in on one day? Also, how many calories do you typically allow for a cheat meal? I usually do about 3 grams of carbs per pound of body weight, and I'll push it up to 4 with some people. Just depends. So that seems to be on target for your carbohydrate intake. And if you're doing 6 meals, it's 100 grams of carbs per meal. 100 grams of carbs should go down pretty easy. Now, if you're doing it all from rice, 600 grams of carbs is going to be 12 cups of rice. It's a lot of fucking rice. So it's about, a cup of rice is roughly, of jasmine rice is roughly 50 grams of carbs, give or take. But that's a ballpark rounded estimate of what it's going to be. What I do on my high days is I do half my carbohydrates from sugary sources. So I will do a cup of rice and say 8 ounces of orange juice or 10 ounces, whatever it works out to be. I don't remember what it is. Or a cup of rice and then I'll pour some honey on it. Or a cup of rice and eat some Frosted Flakes. Or a cup of rice, or sometimes I'll do cream of rice and put some jam on it. And that's how I get the food down. It's really easy to get that food down. And then the sugar has an added benefit as well, especially if you're not using insulin. Having simple sugars in there is going to have an insulin spike, you're going to have a rapid increase in blood sugar, which is going to have a corresponding response from your body where your body's going to release insulin. You're forcing an insulin spike, so to speak. And then you have the starchy carbs in there to sustain things over a period of time. So hopefully there's not reactive hypoglycemia that you get like when you're just eating straight sugar, where you have that rapid increase in insulin and the corresponding crash that happens afterwards because you have no starchy carbs that are going to take longer to digest to sustain and deal with those elevated insulin levels. So that's sort of the idea. I would say, 40 to 50% of your carbohydrates. Sometimes I'll take it a little bit lower. I'll even do fruit. Sometimes I'll even have bananas or pineapples or fruit juice. A lot of times I'll do on the high carbohydrate day and use that as my simple sugar that goes along with my rice. You'll find it's a lot easier to get down. You'll digest it well. For my starchy carbs on high days, I stay away from shit like oats, potatoes, anything that's got high food volume, high satiety index, anything that's going to have a lot of fiber in it, because it's going to be hard to digest that food and process it and to get it down on the high carbohydrate day. Usually the high carbohydrate day, we want to keep fiber very low. I keep vegetables out. I'll do some fiber at the end of the day. As for the cheat meal, if you want to have it, I usually for me, the cheat meal at the end of the high day is just an unmeasured, clean meal. Typically, I'll have a steak. I'll have kebabs and rice. I'll have, sometimes at home I'll make my homemade spaghetti, which is with 96 lean ground beef, or sometimes I'll go get a burger and fries or something like that. But it's just a higher fat, high carb, high protein meal, essentially is what it is if I do it. There's no law that says you have to have the cheat meal at the end of the high day. It's an optional thing. But working with Justin Harris, he has a rule of 1,500 calories or less for the cheat meal. I just look at it as an unmeasured clean meal. Sometimes I'll even just eat my regular meal and just have a fucking sorbet or something with it. Or a low-fat gelato or something like that, just because I want a dessert or something along that. But that's typically how I structure my high carbohydrate days in a carb cycling diet. All right, next question here is from Joe D. Joe asked, did you always know you wanted to compete when you first started lifting? Or was there a moment when you looked in the mirror and thought, man, I can actually do this. I can hang with people. I got fascinated with bodybuilding as a teenager. When I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger, I saw Pumping Iron, I read all the magazines, I followed Dorian Yates and his rise. I remember when Lee Haney was Mr. Olympia. That's how fucking old I am. I wanted to be one of those guys. I knew I wanted to get up there at some point, but I was scared. I didn't know how to do it. There was no help back then. Most gyms didn't have a real bodybuilder. And then the gym I initially attended had a bunch of powerlifters, and then I remember there was a dude there, a guy named Carl. Carl, if you're out there somewhere, you're still alive, I remember you, man. You look like the Macho Man. And I thought Carl was the coolest thing I'd ever seen when I was in high school. He was like a real bodybuilder, and he was getting ready for a show. He had a fucking tan. He was shaved down. He was shredded. I'd never seen anybody that looked like that in person up close. And, probably thinking back when I didn't even think he was that really good of a bodybuilder. I don't know that he ever turned pro. I think he just did local amateur shows. But to me, he looked like fucking Mr. Olympia when I was 18 years old. There wasn't the plethora of information available that there is now to get help. And there were no coaches, at least none that I knew of, to help you get ready for a show. So I didn't even know how to begin to get ready for a show. I had no fucking clue. There was nobody around. There was no help. You just sort of had to figure it out for yourself. Now, I eventually ended up competing later on in life. I had a bunch of false starts when I was younger and never really did it. But I really got serious about it in my 40s. I had some, went through a divorce. Was trying to get back to my center, find myself again. And bodybuilding was a huge part of my life through my teenage years and through my 20s. I worked as a personal trainer off and on. I did some coaching online off and on. I was very serious about the gym. I got really fucking big. I was a gym bodybuilder, power bodybuilder. I remember I got up to close to 300 pounds or even over 300 pounds when I was working with Dante Trudell. But I always thought I had potential. I just didn't know how much, but I was sort of scared to get on the stage too. But I got serious about it in my 40s. Got smoked my first show back. My second show back, I won. I did pretty well. And I thought, well, wow. And, maybe I could do something here. And somebody suggested that I do a national show. After a couple competitions, I did my first national show, and I won my weight class, and I was in the top 3 in the overall. They don't really tell you where you place, but, I was definitely out there in the lineup with the top 3. All 3 of us that were out there are pros now. Juan and Chris, if you guys are listening, but Chris Schwab and my client Juan, we all ended up getting our pro cards. I think Juan got his first, I got mine second, and Chris got his right after. But it was a good group of people out there at that first show, and then last year, I thought I had a shot, but then I ended up winning my weight class and winning the overall. It just kind of all just sort of fucking came together. But the thing with bodybuilding or accomplishing goals, they're a grind. I never really cared about I know this is cliche and you're probably not going to fucking believe me, but I never really cared about getting a pro card. Or I am a very competitive person. I like to compete. I have an athlete's heart. I'm very competitive. I like to be the best, but that competition is more internal now. I really don't think too much about the people that I'm competing against. I want to be the best version of me that I can possibly be. I want to be a better version of me than I was the last time I was on stage. I like to use it as sort of a meditative process where I challenge myself to be a little bit better than I was yesterday, and blah 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 blah. But that's sort of my approach to things when it comes to bodybuilding. And look, ultimately, if you love something, it's never going to be work doing it. I just love bodybuilding. It's the reason why I do these Q&As and have my channel and my Instagram page and spend all my time coaching people and doing it myself. I just love bodybuilding. I love the process of it. I love being involved in it. It's something I'm passionate about and doesn't feel like work to me. I genuinely wake up every day and look, sometimes there are some days I have to push myself to do things, but it's a lot of fucking fun, man. I just love training. I love nutrition. I love the science and the pharmacology behind it. I love the competitive aspect of it. I love the art form of it. I just love everything about it. And to me, the competition is really just a celebration of all the hard work that I've done and an opportunity to show the world the results of that hard work. And, however I place is really some judge's opinion that's completely out of my control. I do the best that I can. I get myself in the best shape that I possibly can. And the rest of it's just up to fate. I never really cared how I place. I know some people get butthurt when they don't place high. It's some judge's fault or whatever. I'm like, dude, you're just completely missing the point of why we do this. It doesn't really have anything to do with that. It's a personal journey. I heard the saying, and I've said it before, you don't climb Mount Everest for the view from the top. If that were the case, you just fucking take a helicopter. Although I don't think helicopters can fly that high, but you get what I'm saying. It's really about the journey. It's about the experience, the trials and tribulations, and the self-improvement, and all the other things that come along with it. So, yes, there came a point where I realized that I could be competitive at it. There came a point where, even if I wasn't, look, I see, I see guys that get fourth and fifth place at shows every year, and they keep doing shows every year, and I hear people poo-poo that, and I'm like, why is that guy doing that? It seems like a waste of time. I don't understand why he would do that to himself when he's not very good at bodybuilding. It's the same reason people play flag football and recreational basketball, even though they're never going, or play golf on the weekends, even though they're never going to be a professional athlete, and they don't have the tools available to be a professional athlete. The reason you go out and play flag football, even though you're not in the NFL, is because you just love football. It has nothing to do with being the MVP of the Super Bowl. You just love playing. And it's the same thing with bodybuilding. If you want to go out and compete and you enjoy it and you don't have the physical tools for it, so what? It's your personal journey. And that's sort of like my thought process on it, is if you love doing it, if it's something you're passionate about, if it's something that makes you happy, go do it. That's it. That's kind of me with bodybuilding. Long story short, even if I was getting fifth place at the local show, I'd probably still be out there competing because I just fucking like it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the community. I enjoy the people that I've met. And I enjoy the science and detail that goes behind it. I just love every part of it. All right, Nathan Y. This is the last question. This one's from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding Members Community. Links in the video description if you want to join up and ask questions too. Nathan asked, on your live, you mentioned a glycogen formula for adding carbs. 1,000 grams equals 2.2 pounds plus 3 to 4 grams per water. Can you explain this in more detail, including timing, so that someone doesn't end up looking flat? Yeah, it's not one-to-one, man. We can't accurately predict how our body's going to synthesize glycogen, but yes, you can do some math on it. 1,000 grams is a kilogram, which is 2.2 pounds roughly. 3 to 4 grams of water per gram of glucose it takes to make glycogen. Now, whether or not it one-to-one translates like that, who the fuck knows? But when people freak out when they see the scale go up the day after their high carbohydrate day, and they're like, "Oh my God, I gained a bunch of fat." You'll see when guys go on vacation and they eat a bunch of carbs and sodium, and then they just have water retention. The key point here is that we have to remember that not all weight gain is fat gain, and not all fat gain is weight gain either. I mean, you can trade off, and you'll see this with guys running keto diets, not to shit on the keto dudes, but they'll have rapid weight loss and think that they're losing fat. It's not fat loss, it's water and glycogen loss initially. Now, it's not to say that you can't lose fat on a keto diet. You certainly can. It's ultimately about net energy balance in burning fat stores. But we have to remember that our body partitions energy in multiple ways. Really, we have stored energy as glycogen, glucose, but that can happen both in the liver and the muscle. Depending on the size of the person, the muscle can hold quite a bit of glycogen. A large bodybuilder could probably synthesize north of 1,000 grams of carbohydrates into glycogen to a certain degree. A smaller person, I think, just if I remember right, reading the studies on it, an average adult male has the capacity of somewhere around 500 grams of carbohydrates can be synthesized into muscle glycogen. So a large bodybuilder is going to have significantly more than that. So that's something that we have to factor into the equation. And it does take sodium and water to synthesize glycogen. And we know what the formula is. So we can sort of predict that there is going to be a weight gain after a high carbohydrate day. Body also partitions energy from stored protein structures. That's another thing that guys don't consider. And also in body fat. The body fat is another way for the body to store energy. So primarily we have glycogen, stored carbohydrates. We have body fat, which is predominantly stored fat. It is possible for your body to turn carbohydrates into fat, but there's multiple steps that it has to go through where your body needs to glycogen needs to be somewhat topped off first, and then there's liponeogenesis that happens through the liver, and then those lipids can be stored as body fat. So there's multiple steps, but there was a recent study, I can't remember what it was, where they did I think it was mass spectrometry test on the composition of stored body fat, where it actually came from, and I think the majority of the stored body fat, it was something like close to 90%, actually originated from dietary fats. Just so you know. So your body partitions energy differently. Fat mostly gets stored as body fat if we are in a energy surplus. Carbohydrates first and foremost if you are an actively trained person. If you're somebody who's lifting weights and giving your body a reason to store glycogen, will be stored as muscle and liver glycogen. Protein is usually used for tissue repair, often excreted. Your body can also break down protein structures for energy. If you are in an energy deficit, we can certainly break down protein structures and through gluconeogenesis and convert those protein structures into glucose. And if you're in a severely deprived state where your body needs some glucose for basic metabolic functions, brain and central nervous system, your body will break down protein structures, which is not what we want, for glucose. So, in summary here, yes, there is a somewhat predictable formula. I'll do, some of it's going to depend, but, a large bodybuilder, and it's not uncommon, for me, I can jump up 9-10 pounds from a high carbohydrate day. And then eventually that weight washes off as we burn through the glycogen, especially in the diet phase. But a big dude like me, I can carb up and put on 9-10 pounds of weight without gaining any fat easily. And that's something to consider, So not all weight gain is fat gain. Not all weight loss is fat loss. Not all, weight loss is fat, is muscle loss. So we have to consider that. There's water, there's protein loss, there's loss of glycogen, there's loss of fat. And ultimately, as bodybuilders, we want to minimize fat gain. We want to maximize muscle retention and muscle gain. We want to maximize fat burning, and we want to maximize glycogen retention. So those are the things that are going to yield the best look ultimately for you as a bodybuilder. Keep those in perspective. Not all weight gain or weight loss is fat loss. All right, folks, that's all I got for you today on this one. I appreciate each and every one of you. You are the best. Thank you for all your support. If you have not hit that like or subscribe button and you've made it this far, please do so. I'd appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode. Rock on, motherfuckers.